Hello there. For a few videos now, I've been doing kind of the search for the ultimate stylus, and I've been showing off different styli or styluses. I'll use those terms interchangeably in this video, and just kind of taking a look at their attributes, and that's pretty much about it. And I've kind of been feeling like that maybe a rating system might be helpful here, to kind of compare between styluses. Of course, there's still an aspect of styli that is just very personal, and so there is definitely a subjective element to this. But what if we tried to focus on the objective elements, and how would the styluses compare when you did that? So that's what this video is about. I call it Mossman's Stylus Rating System, or SRS. And we're going to go ahead and go through what those criteria are. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick 10 styli that we'll review for the purposes of establishing the system. And then going forward, as I review new styluses, then we'll add them to the list and kind of keep this running total. So I hope it's just fun, no matter what. And I hope you find it entertaining at the minimum and possibly helpful. So let's go check out the criteria. Alright, so let's take a look at how the Mossman Stylus Rating System, or SRS, is going to work. And we'll start with list price. This is pretty straightforward. If the stylus costs $60, actually more than $60, then there'll be no points for that. However, if the stylus is between $30 and including $60, then I'll award a point. That's about average for most styli. However, if the stylus is $30 and under, that's a full 3 points, because that's a pretty inexpensive stylus. The rest of the attributes will be awarded on the following system. If the attribute doesn't exist, obviously that's no points. If it's there but it's not implemented great, that's 1 point. And if the attribute is present and it's implemented well, that's 3 points. These attributes will include things like erasers and magnets. And there are also special features I'll be considering as well. So what is a special feature? Well, it can be either a functional characteristic or some significant aesthetic feature. So a functional characteristic, for example, would be Bluetooth buttons, whereas an significant aesthetic feature is something that is not a minor detail of the stylus, but something that's very present and obvious. I'm sure there's a little bit of judgment that will be applied and what I consider to be a special feature versus what others might, particularly as it relates to aesthetics. But I'm going to try to be consistent, and hopefully that works out. So what's not going to be included? Well, we're going to start with nibs. Nibs really are separate from the stylus. Often you can take a nib from one stylus and move it to another. Not always. Not all nibs fit in every stylus, but there is a certain level of interchangeability there. So we can kind of consider the nib as something separate from the stylus itself. And also, the primary attribute of a nib is around sound. And yeah, there's a little bit of a feel sometimes, but regardless, that's pretty subjective. It's not a particularly objective measure, and I'm trying in general to stick to objective measures as much as I can. So we won't be talking about nibs. Another kind of key thing I'm going to exclude, and this one I had a tough time with, I had to think about this quite a bit, is regarding flat surfaces in a stylus. Now, on one hand, you can think of a flat surface as being an aesthetic feature, like maybe the stylus is a hexagonal shape, or maybe it's mostly round but with one flat side. But in this case, what I struggled with a bit was that when was that flat surface a functional feature? So for example, some companies that sell these styluses talk about their flat edge of their stylus as a mechanism to keep it from rolling too far if it were to drop to the ground. In addition to that, a flat end of a stylus can help with a stronger connection with the device, particularly for using a magnetic connection. So there are arguments to be made that there is a functional attribute for a stylus that has a flat side versus one that doesn't. But in the end of the day, the more I thought about it, the more I thought that this really wasn't a criteria that deserved to be scored. And that's, of course, a judgment on my part. You might disagree, but that's how I'm moving forward with the system. Finally, any small aesthetic differences will not be scored. So these are just small little touches that don't seem to have a functional element. They might look good, but it's not something that I'll be attributing any point values towards. All right, with that said, with the criteria established, let's go ahead and look in turn at 10 different styluses and see how they stack up with each other. Okay, we're going to start off looking at what I call the Mobiscribe Standard. And this is the stylus that you get when you purchase their Wave device. And so Standard is just my nickname. There's no formal name for the stylus that I'm aware of, but you can see the Mobiscribe logo there. It's got a button here on top with just a little bit of give. And otherwise, it's not particularly notable. It's thinner than most styli, or at least it certainly looks thinner. Feels probably as one of the cheapest of the styluses that we'll be covering today. It does have an hexagonal shape for most of the shaft, and that's pretty much its only notable feature. So let's go ahead and score it. So first off, as it relates to cost, the Mobiscribe is $49, so it's a little bit on the expensive side. Really, I guess more in the middle, so it gets a point for that. It doesn't have a button eraser, so there's no points for that. It does have an end cap eraser, and it works pretty well. My one argument against it is that it's not always consistent. You have to be very thoughtful about how you press down on the end cap eraser. I'm not a fan of having to press down, but that fact alone isn't going to lose points for a stylus. But the fact that it doesn't always work and you have to be very conscientious of it, to me, that does take away points. And so we'll just give it a 1 for that. No side magnet, and it really has no special features. Remember that I will not be scoring flat sides as a feature. So in total, it gets a 2. So this is going to be the baseline for all of our styluses. No stylus will score this low. And I think it's a fair assessment for this stylus, which is certainly functional. I mean, this is definitely a usable stylus, as we just saw here. But it definitely feels very cheap. An end cap eraser could be better. Nothing really going for it, and still relatively expensive. So a 2 is an appropriate score in my mind. Okay, let's wipe the slate clean, and then we will go on to the next stylus. All right, the next stylus is the Boox Pen Plus, and I have a little bit of a soft side for this. This is the first stylus that I ever had for an e-note-taking device, and that was, of course, on the Boox Note Air, the original Note Air. It's flat on one side, that's where the magnet is, as well as the logo, and the rest of it has kind of this nice textured grooved shaft that basically goes from one end to the other. I always thought aesthetically it looked just a little bit nicer than most styluses, and it always had a comfortable feel in my mind, but not a lot else going for it. So why don't we go ahead and rate it and see how it stacks up. So we'll start with the cost, and this pen costs, if it doesn't come with the device, it costs $46. So that's, okay, that's going to be a point there. There is no eraser, either button or end cap. There is a magnet though, and the magnet actually is pretty good. Pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and give that a 3, but there's nothing else special about it. So we're going to go ahead and zero those out. And of course that means our total therefore is a 4. I do like this stylus. This is one of my personal favorites, but I have to say that this score does seem fair in my mind. And there's a lot of people that don't like this stylus, so I don't think there's going to be a lot of broken hearts over the low score. Anyway, that does it for this one. Let's go ahead and wipe the slate clean, and then we'll move on to the next stylus. Okay, our attention turns to another stylus that I just kind of enjoy aesthetically, and this is the Nibtou Tech, and I'm just calling it the wooden. There's no formal name from the stylus that I'm aware of. This is the stylus that I reviewed on a previous video. You can see they've got Nibtou Tech printed there. They do have a flat side, but otherwise a rounded shaft. But the big attraction to this is the fact that it's made of wood, and you can feel that wooden texture as you're holding on to the stylus. Even though I reviewed this particular stylus, I don't remember what kind of wood this is. However, I can tell you that its sister stylus is made of bamboo and has a slightly different texture, but otherwise is the same stylus. So the rating system will apply for both of these styli. Okay, let's go into it. So as we look at the cost, it's $37, so that's going to grant itself a point, so it's kind of mid-range. No erasers to speak of. No side magnet. I'm going to call the fact that it's made of wood, it has that texture, I think that's enough to be a special feature, and I'm going to give it 3 points for that. I have a soft spot for this. I think it's quite good, and certainly different in a sea of black plastic styli, but it doesn't have any other features, so that gives it a total score of 4. So this is not the first stylus that's going to score a 4, and it won't be the last. A solid stylus, but it won't stand among the greats, but it's certainly worth considering just for the novelty of it, but don't expect anything special. And that is the Nibtou Tech. Let's go ahead and wipe the slate clean, and we're going to move on to the next stylus. All right, next up is a classic stylus. This is the Staedtler Doris Digital Jumbo, and you can see straight off what the theme of this particular stylus is. Well, you can see one of the themes, which of course is the fact that it's designed to kind of look like a pencil. Even the texture here on the tip feels like the shaven part of a pencil. It has kind of a triangular design with these rounded edges in the yellow parts of the shaft. It's got a little button eraser here, not a lot of give, which is nice. The other thing to note about this particular stylus that's not obvious from looking at it is outside of the theme of it being a pencil, or in the inspired by a pencil, it is extremely soft. The texture of the shaft itself feels soft, and the writing feels very soft as well, and it doesn't make a lot of sound. You can barely hear the scratching as I'm writing on the screen. So, how does this particular stylus rank? Well, let's go ahead and find out. We're going to start off with cost, and this is one where actually it doesn't do too well. It's $80 as a list price, and that's really outside of awarding any points, so it gets a 0 there. Button eraser, and this is where I might lose some people. I'm not a fan of it. You don't have to press down, so that's great. But the problem is the stylus tends to grip the screen. I'm sorry, the eraser rather, tends to grip the screen. And that makes it less of a smooth experience. So it's a good eraser. We just saw it work just now, but I don't feel like it's worth 3 points. So I'm going to go ahead and give it 1. And that, of course, is the end cap eraser. There is no button eraser, so we'll give it that 1 point. No magnet. In terms of special, I think the pencil motif is actually really cool. It definitely gives it a distinct design. It doesn't look hokey. That's 3 points for that. I'm not going to give points for the softness. I think that's an interesting choice. I'm not sure it's one that warrants points, but if you're looking for a stylus that has a very soft writing experience, then I don't think there's a better one on this list than the Doris Digital Jumbo. But that's not an attribute that I'm scoring, so unfortunately it won't get any additional points, and so it's only going to score a 4. Now, this score, of course, will be seen by many people to be sacrilegious, and I certainly appreciate it. I do know why there's such a passion around this particular stylus, but when you look at the criteria that I tend to focus on, it just doesn't stack up particularly well. I wish that eraser end cap didn't grip as much as it did. It would have gotten more points for that. I do appreciate how soft it writes, but for me, that's more of a nature of the nib, which I'm not scoring here in this case. So for those reasons, I'm ranking this stylus fairly low. Still competent. All these 4-point styluses are still good styluses in my mind. But you can, the reasons, the softness are reasons why other people might rank it highly than that, and you might feel that way too. But for here, the Stylus gets a 4-pointer. All right, let's go ahead and wipe the slate clean, and let's go ahead and move on to the next stylus. Oh, there's a lot of grip there. Okay, so our attention now turns to the Boox Pen 2 Pro, and this is actually the pen that comes with the Boox Tab Ultra C, so we'll see if there's any kind of home field advantage with that. Just a quick overview, it's very similar to the Boox Pen Plus in that you've got this flat edge with a magnet that's signified there, and you've got the Boox logo there. You do see, in this case, an end cap eraser, and there's quite a bit of give on that eraser. So we'll get to that in a second. Otherwise, it's pretty unremarkable, with the one exception that this is the longest stylus on the list. I have seen a number of posts mention how they don't like the fact that the stylus is so long. I don't mind it. I don't think it's an asset, but it doesn't detract for me either. But for some folks, that's an issue. But let's go ahead and see how this thing scores. And we'll start with the cost. And this has a fairly expensive cost at $80. So that's not going to earn it any points for that. No button eraser. It has an end cap eraser that works fine. However, you really do have to press down to activate that eraser. And while I normally don't detract points for that, even though I don't particularly care, and there's no need, in my opinion, to have to put any pressure on the stylus, although most end cap erasers require some pressure, I think this one requires a little bit too much, quite honestly, in order for it to be consistently applied. So I'm not going to give it full points for that. I'm going to give it 1 point. It could have been better implemented. The side magnet, fantastic. Very solid. Of course, it's made for this device, but still, it's a really good magnet. Does earn the full 3 points for that. There's nothing else special about this stylus that I'm going to score. So I'm going to go ahead and give it zeros across the board, and that's going to give it a total of 4 points, which, again, 4 points isn't bad. We've seen a number of pretty good styli get the same number of points, but considering the cost on this one, I can't help but think that this 4 is a little more of an upset than it is with the other styluses. For the price, you'd expect a bit more. But you don't get it. Instead, you get a 4 points. Let's go ahead now and wipe the slate clean, and let's move on to the next stylus. Okay, we're halfway through, and this is what the table looks like. You know, most of these styli are pretty good. These are good, solid styli to use. There really isn't a bad one. Even the Mobiscribe is not a terrible stylus. It just kind of feels like it's a little cheaper than the others. So these are all good choices, but they didn't make the top half of the list. So let's go ahead and move on to see what styluses did. All right, next up is the Remarkable Marker Plus. At the surface, it doesn't seem like anything that special. I mean, it has this flat edge, otherwise rounded, a little bit of a artistic kind of contour there with the word remarkable. I'm not sure the camera is picking that up or not, but you can see the word remarkable right there. Has a little button here on top for the eraser, a little bit of give there. There is an interesting texture along the shaft, and I'll be honest, this is one of the reasons why I don't like this stylus. My initial impressions holding it is I like the texture. I initially think, oh, that's kind of cool, but what I tend to find with my fingers anyway is my grip slips on this stylus, and there's actually no other stylus that I'm aware of that does that. So I'm not a particular fan of this stylus. Nevertheless, I'm not going to be scoring that particular feature. So let's see how it does stack up to the criteria that I have set up for this. So we'll start off with cost, and very expensive. This is $129. That is a 0 for sure. There is no button eraser, but there is an end cap eraser. And I'll just show it right now. You do need to put a little bit of pressure on the stylus, but really it's not that bad. Again, I'm not a fan of putting pressure, but I have to say, it's just a touch. You can adjust to it. I'm going to go ahead and give that 3 points for that. In terms of the side magnet, pretty good side magnet. So I'd say that gets a 3 points as well. outside of that, I don't really see anything special to note on this particular stylus. So I'm going to go ahead and zero it out, and it gets a decent and respectable score of a 6. So even though I don't care for this stylus, using this methodology, I do find it to be one of the mid-range rated styluses on this list. And I know there's a lot of fans out there. I'm just not one of them. All right, that's my review on this particular stylus. Let's go ahead and wipe the slate clean and move on to the next one. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Bigme, what I'm referring to as the pen stylus. There's no formal name that I'm aware of, but you'll notice at the near the top of the shaft, there's these two little pins. These connect to Bigme devices and charge the stylus. This isn't an active stylus. The pins are actually only there for the Bluetooth buttons, of which there are 3 of them. So you don't actually need the charging for the stylus to operate, but it does work with these Bluetooth buttons. We'll talk about those in a second. Otherwise, kind of an interesting design. It is a plastic shaft, but you have this kind of gray color as opposed to black, which most styli are. And then you've got these little red rings that give it a little bit of an artistic flair. It's kind of interesting. I'm a little bit neutral on the look myself, but at least it's trying to do something different. I won't score any points for that, but you know, give it a little bit of credit for that. Let's go ahead and score it. So we're going to start off with the cost. Of course, this does, like many of these styluses, come with the device, but if you had to buy it separately, you'd be spending $60. So that's, you know, a little bit on the expensive side. In fact, it's right on the edge, but it still gets a point. It does have a button eraser and these Bluetooth buttons. However, the way it works is you often find yourself having to press the button multiple times to establish your connection to the device. And it's only a Bigme device, by the way, that this works. So you couldn't use the buttons here on this Boox device or any other for that matter. But the fact that it's not always reliable, takes a couple button pushes, particularly when you're using it for the first time in a session, that detracts from it in my mind. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a point. No end cap eraser. It has a magnet, very weak. I don't even think it's going to work. Well, I guess it does. Yeah. Actually, it's not too bad on this one, but on the Bigme device, it's not as strong. That's curious. So I'm still going to give it 1 point for that. The fact that this does have Bluetooth buttons is a really powerful feature, and it's not just for an eraser button. You can program and do other things. For example, you can refresh the screen with a button push, or if you're reading a book, you can use the buttons to advance pages. Pretty cool. This is the only stylus that has that, so I'm going to give it 3 points for that. At the end of the stylus is a laser pointer, which I'm going to demonstrate now. There you go. Pretty cool. Actually, pretty useless unless you have cats. But if you do have cats, that's worth a solid point for that. And that's pretty much going to do it for special features. So the total is 7 for the Bigme stylus. A pretty respectable score. But keep in mind that in order to leverage those full 7 points, you do need to use the stylus with a Bigme device to take advantage of those Bluetooth buttons. But not bad. All right, let's go ahead, and I can't use the button stylus, but we'll go ahead and wipe the slate clean the standard way and move on to the next styli. Okay, now we're coming up with the last stylus in this video that is made by a third party, meaning someone that doesn't create the devices as well. And this is the Kingrite. There's 2 versions. There's a black version and a white version, nearly identical. The one thing that I would note is that you'll notice that the logo for Kingrite is much smaller on the black version than it is on the white one. I much prefer the black one for that particular reason, but other than that, they're the same, and for the purposes of scoring, we'll treat them as if they are equal. So let's go ahead and, before we go into that, so you do have a little bit of give, but very minimal on the eraser, so we'll talk about that in a second. It does have a mainly rounded shaft with a flat edge. There is a magnet there, and it does have a button for the eraser, which is right there. So quite a bit of features for this third party. Let's see how it does in terms of the scoring. So first off, in terms of cost, it's about $50, so that's 1 point for that, kind of right in the middle. The button eraser is really nice. If you are holding the stylus and you're not sure where the button is, you just turn the shaft and your thumb's going to run into that. And it's a very nice eraser. That's a solid 3 points. But I think the end cap eraser is even better. Finally, we have an eraser where you don't have to put any pressure at all. I'm not going to put any pressure. I'm just going to have it touch the screen. Look at that. Beautiful. All of them should be that way. But this is the only one on this list. I'm going to give it 3 points for that. It does have a side magnet. Not particularly strong. It's a fairly weak magnet. It's easy to move the stylus around. So we're going to go ahead and just give it 1 point for that. But still, this is the only stylus on the list that isn't made by a device manufacturer that actually has a magnet. So it's a very notable feature. So very strong showing so far, but really that's where the points end. There's no particular special feature that these styli have. And so our total, therefore, becomes, oops, okay, 8 points. Very solid and respectable score for this stylus. It doesn't do anything fancy, but it handles all the fundamentals really well. And I have to say that even though I like the Boox Pen Plus on the Boox Note Air 3C, I'm actually using this particular stylus as my go-to because I think it's better than that Boox stylus. And in particular, this eraser is just absolutely fantastic. Best end cap eraser in the business. All right, we're moving up. Let's go ahead and wipe the slate clean and go on to our next stylus. All right, we're nearing the end and we're having a much better sense of what the best styluses are. With currently the Kingwright on top, will it be able to hold that position with 2 more styluses to go? Let's find out. All right, we're now moving into the elite category of styli, and now we feature the Supernote Heart of Metal 2. Here's an example. It has a very classic look. It's one of the more well-designed styluses in terms of the visual aesthetic. I think probably the Nibtou, or I'm sorry, the Staedtler Norris Jumbo is obviously another particularly notable one. But this is a world of, normally black and indescript shafts for styli. This Heart of Metal pen certainly stands out from that. It has a cap that you can actually attach to the end, or you can leave it clipped into the case of your Supernote. It has a ceramic stylus, which is why I will not be writing on this surface, but it just has a very classic look and feel to it. It doesn't have any type of eraser, but you can use on a Supernote the 2-finger eraser function, and it works just as well. So let's go ahead and score this classic stylus. We're going to enlist the support of the Kingwright stylus. The ceramic nibs could theoretically scratch the surface of a non-Supernote device, and so that's the reason why I won't be scoring with this stylus. Let's start with cost. Pretty expensive at $75. It's not going to earn any points there. It doesn't have a button eraser, nor does it have an end cap eraser. In fact, it doesn't have a magnet either. So not a great start. But now it starts to pick up in the special categories. We'll start off with the design. It's a fantastic design, a classic stationary pen type of design, very well executed. It gets 3 points for that. In addition to that, it has this cap that helps cover the nib. Also with the clip, the combination of the cap and the clip, that's also worth 3 points. And finally, the fact that it has a permanent nib. This is the only stylus on the list today that will never need to be replaced. So that's also fantastic, and it also deserves 3 points. So the total for the Supernote Heart of Metal Pen 2 is 9 points. It doesn't do any of the fundamentals particularly well, certainly compared to the Kingwright, but it has an incredible special attributes more than any other stylus that we've talked about today. All right, let's wipe the slate clean and end on a strong note. Last but not least on this video is the Scribe Premium Pen. Can this stylus knock off the heart of metal pen from Supernode as the best stylus out there? Let's find out. First off, just to review the stylus, it does start with, it has a flat edge with an eraser button, and then it's got kind of this grooved feature that ends with an end cap eraser and quite a bit of give there on the eraser, which I'm not a huge fan of. If you go around the rest of the shaft, it's fairly nondescript, it's curved. You do have the Amazon logo right there. One of the things that sticks out is the length of the stylus. It's not the longest stylus, that still is the Boox Pen 2 Pro, but this is the second longest stylus on the list. And again, I have no concerns about the length of it. It handles in the hand just fine, but let's see how it scores. Well, we'll start with cost, and the retail cost is $60, so it's just at the edge of getting a point, but it does earn that point. The button eraser is absolutely fantastic, very reliable. It's getting 3 points for that. The end cap eraser is not as reliable. And again, I'm not a huge fan of pressing down, but I'm not going to take points away for that. What I am going to take points away for is if I have a large swath, it stops erasing. It's not consistent, at least on this Boox device anyway. So it works, but in large swaths, it works inconsistently. That's only going to get it 1 point. It does have a side magnet, a very good side magnet, very reliable. So that's a strong 3 points there, but that's where the points end. It doesn't do anything special beyond that. Still quite solid among the fundamentals, and it scores 8 points. So that's enough to match the Kingrite, which I think has a very similar kind of fundamental feature set, but 1 point shy of the Heart of Metal 2. So not quite at the top of the heap, but still a very good stylus nonetheless. Let's go ahead and wipe the slate clean, and then we'll end with final thoughts. All right, with our first 10 styluses rated, it's the Supernode Heart of Metal Pen that has come in to first place, even though they didn't take any points from the first 4 categories. They're the one stylus that had special points across the board, and their total of 9 points makes it the best stylus out there, at least according to this rating system. Of course, if you don't have a Supernode, then your attention would turn either to the Kindle Scribe Premium Pen or the Kingrite, both excellent styluses that do the fundamentals very well. So there you go. This is the first iteration of Mossman's stylus rating system. As I review more styluses going forward, we'll add them to the list and see where they fall. All right, so that's the first 10 styli scored and ranked. Hopefully you found it entertaining. If you disagreed, certainly feel free to put that in the comments. Maybe you might even convince me to change the system. Who knows? There's definitely a lot more styli to come. As you can tell, I've got my special stylus mug here, and there's a lot of styli in there. I have at least 5 in the queue to add to the review system. Those will include classics like the Wacom 1 or the Lamy All-Star, to other more unusual items like the Mobiscribe Concrete or one of the cheaper styli in the list, the kind of Samsung S9 stylus. So there's quite a few styli already in the queue, and I'm sure there'll be even more beyond that. And so we'll just keep this rating system going and keep a running tally and see if we ever do find that ultimate stylus. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe. Otherwise, you have a great day.